Hello, and welcome to the Resource Nexus podcast.
As we roll into summer, the three Grand Slam tournaments of the Northern Hemisphere are just around the corner, and you know what that means. It's the perfect time to reflect on where we stand in the all-time tennis rankings. Now, let's dive into the big change we've seen recently. Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal have officially hung up their rackets, which leaves us with Novak Djokovic standing tall as the undisputed leader of the pack. With 24 Grand Slam titles and counting, Djokovic now holds the most in the Open era. That's right. He's standing alone at the top. And honestly, that milestone, it feels like a game changer. Hopefully we can all agree on that. It's something I've believed for a while now, even before he snagged the lead. For years, we've watched an epic arms race unfold, Grand Slam victories, weeks at number one, and of course those legendary head-to-head battles, but now they're all gone. So, where does Novak's 24th title leave us in the race for the greatest of all time and the rest of the top 15? Now, if you've been following us, you already know our stance. Grand Slam titles are important, but they aren't the whole story, especially when comparing across different eras. Let's talk about the Australian Open for a second. The little secret that rarely gets mentioned. For a big chunk of its history, it just wasn't on the radar for non-Australians. Plenty of legends never even made the trip, so when you're counting slams, those players started with a disadvantage before the match even began. And let's not forget the chaos of the pre-Open and early Open eras. Guys like Rod Laver and Ken Rosewall, they were in their 30s before they could even play the other pros in the slams. Their resumes are skewed, and yeah, that has to be factored in. Then there's the 1980s. A major shift in equipment changed how the game was played entirely. Wooden rackets gave way to graphite and power. A whole generation of greats had to adapt on the fly. Fast forward to today, and you got players like Andy Murray, world-class talents, who just happened to peak during the Big Three era. Brutal timing. Honestly, the Big Three might have even cannibalized each other's accomplishments along the way. So for this breakdown, we're not just going to blindly count trophies. We'll try to adjust for the different circumstances, whether it's players from the Australian Open's underplayed era or the professionals who competed for slam equivalents before the Open era began. Careers come in all shapes and sizes too. Take Bjorn Borg, retired at 25. If he'd stuck around longer, we might be talking about him as the right now, but he didn't, and that matters. Longevity, staying power, they count just as much as the shiny hardware. Bottom line, there's no one-size-fits-all formula for greatness, but this is our list, based on our criteria, which, by the way, is backed by a lot of historical consensus. These are the greatest male tennis players of all time, as we see them. And remember, Grand Slams are just one chapter in a much bigger story. First, Novak Djokovic. All right, let's get this out of the way first. I believe the data is crystal clear at this point. Novak Djokovic is the greatest tennis player that has ever lived. To do what he did when he did it during the golden era of Nadal, Roger Federer, and Andy Murray is absolutely unmatched. His game translates across every surface mentally, one of the toughest to ever pick up a racket. He's got the highest peak ELO rating ever, the most weeks at world number one, the most big tournament wins, and now for the most Grand Slam titles. And remember, all of this came in the most competitive era tennis has ever seen. What's wild is he still looks like he has good years left in the tank. And I say this as someone who personally preferred watching Rafa and Roger. But let's not kid ourselves. Novak is clearly number one. Funny enough, among fans, he still ranks third in popularity among the Big Three. I felt this was true for a while now. But after watching him win Slam titles 21 and 22, passing Federer and tying Nadal, the argument is all but done, especially when you look at the other metrics, which he dominates. His style is the most adaptable. His game travels across surfaces like a passport, and even with some of the off-court stuff. Oh, and let's talk grass. 7 Wimbledon titles, one shy of Federer's record, and he's chasing 5 in a row, something only Roger has pulled off before. The fact that he's also managed to win the French Open twice in Nadal's era, that's just absurd. Only Rafa has done the double career Grand Slam as well.
Peak ELO ratings:
Djokovic, 2,629. Nadal, 2,552. Federer, 2,550. That's rarefied air. So if you're still trying to debate the GOAT conversation, you might need a new stat sheet. Grand Slam breakdown: 24 titles, Australian Open, 10 titles, French Open, 3 titles, Wimbledon, 7 titles, US Open, 4 titles, and second, Rafael Nadal. Next up, the King of Clay, Rafael Nadal. We've got Rafa in the number 2 spot, and honestly, no one has ever dominated a surface the way Nadal has ruled Roland. He won his first French Open in 2005 and kept winning 17 years later. That's nuts.
But, and here's where we have to be honest, his heavy reliance on clay does ding his legacy just a little bit. Clay's a specialized surface. It plays nothing like the standard hard courts and arguably less like modern grass too. So yeah, that concentration of success matters when you're ranking all-time greats. Think of it like this. We've seen guys like Thomas Muster ride one surface all the way to number 1, and critics definitely had opinions about that. It's a legit debate, and something we'll unpack more down the road still. Nadal's Wimbledon win over Federer, iconic, one of the greatest matches ever. But when it comes to comparing surface versatility, he doesn't quite match up with Novak. That said, he does have a career Golden Slam, all 4 majors plus an Olympic gold. And Nadal, like Djokovic, has done the rare double career Grand Slam. He also won Wimbledon twice in an era dominated by Federer and Djokovic, which is no small feat. Head-to-head, Djokovic leads 30-29. They're basically the same age. So now it's about longevity. I thought he was physically done years ago, and he still kept winning slams. That kind of resilience and grit, it's one of his defining traits. And let's talk about Roger, probably number 3 all time. Here's the truth. Federer won a lot of his slams in a slightly weaker era. That doesn't mean the early 2000s were soft, just that they weren't as historically stacked as the Djokovic-Nadal-Murray era that followed. Players like Hewitt, Roddick, and Safin were tough, but they weren't Rafa and Novak. And Federer stacked his slam count before they hit their primes. Once they arrived, things got harder. And to his credit, he still competed at a crazy high level. That said, it's important to understand context. Nadal and Djokovic lived in a world where the big 3 were always present. Federer had a few golden years before that gauntlet arrived. That matters when we talk legacy. Still, 103 career titles, 20 Grand Slams, an elegant game that stood the test of time, and a serve and volley style that let him stay dangerous into his late 30s. Federer is a legend, no doubt about it, but at this point the dust has settled. He's number 3, Grand Slam breakdown, 20 titles, Wimbledon 8, Australian Open 6, US Open 5, French Open 1. Now this one's tricky. Bjorn Borg, the coolest guy to ever rock a headband. He might have gone down as the GOAT if he didn't walk away from the sport at 25. He won 11 majors in just 28 attempts. That's ridiculous. But he never played the Australian Open seriously, and he didn't stick around long enough to rack up more. Longevity matters. You have to factor that in. This wasn't an injury thing either. It was burnout. His obsessive training led him to tap out early. And as fans, we were robbed of what could have been even more greatness. It's possible, and maybe even likely, that with the rise of new equipment and style changes, his dominance might have faded anyway. But we'll never know. Borg and Nadal are the only 2 men with 6 or more French Open titles. That's elite territory. But the big knock is that he never won the US Open, even though it rotated surfaces during his era. He was elite across the board, but never quite sealed that deal. Still, Borg pushed the sport forward. He brought style, cool, and star power during tennis's peak popularity, but his career was just too short to seriously challenge the big 3. Number 5, Pete Sampras. These two, Sampras and Murray,
might be the toughest to rank, but in a weird way, they're connected. Like, you kind of have to view them through each other to really understand where they land in tennis history. So, yeah, Pete Sampras has 14 Grand Slam titles. That's obviously legendary, but let's be real. The guy was a total zero on clay. Never even made a final at the French Open, much less won it. That's a pretty glaring hole. Then you add in his relatively weaker all-time win percentage and honestly kind of pedestrian total title count, even in terms of the big ones, and it knocks him down a peg. Now, compare that to someone like Andy Murray. Murray's prime overlapped with arguably the three greatest players ever: Federer, Nadal, Djokovic. That's brutal. It's like trying to win a race with three Ferraris in front of you. Plus, let's not forget, the game evolved. The surfaces started playing more alike. Wimbledon slowed down a bit. Serving wasn't quite the cheat code it used to be. So yeah, different conditions, different challenges. And then there's Murray's injury. Had he called it quits after his first hip surgery, his career length would have matched Sampras almost exactly. But instead, he kept grinding. Even as a diminished version of himself, he stuck it out because he loves the game. That's admirable. And honestly, it hurt his numbers a bit. But context matters. The guy was running into the big three in the semifinals of nearly every slam. You think Sampras was facing Federer, Nadal, or Djokovic in his prime? Nope. He was going up against guys like Goran Ivanišević, Carlos Moya, and Patrick Rafter. Respect to those guys, but let's not pretend it's the same thing. Let's talk semifinal appearances at the majors. Federer and Djokovic are tied with 46. Nadal's got 38. Jimmy Connors, 31. Lendl at 28. Agassi at 26. And Sampras. Here's where it gets spicy. Look at the percentages. But wait. Now check this out. Before the hip replacement, Sampras, 23 semis in 52 majors, 44%. Murray, 21 semis in 46 majors, 46%. So yeah, Murray actually had a better semifinal percentage at the same age. If you swapped eras, I genuinely believe Sampras ends up with fewer slams, and I don't think their talent gap is nearly as wide as people assume. Murray had a higher peak ELO rating, a close career win percentage, 20 big titles compared to Pete's 32, almost identical numbers in slam semifinals, even one more Grand Slam quarterfinal than Pete. The only difference, every time Murray got deep in a tournament, one of the big three was there, waiting. That's a wall not many could climb. Meanwhile, Sampras walked away early, still winning, still a contender. If he sticks around into his mid-30s like Federer or Djokovic, who knows how many more titles he racks up, but he didn't. And that counts too. Number 6, Jimmy Connors. Now here's a guy who deserves tons of credit. Jimmy Connors successfully navigated one of the biggest transitions in tennis history, from wood to graphite rackets, and he did it with swagger. First burst onto the scene as a brash 20-year-old, immediately started dominating. He took down legends from the previous generation, guys like Rod Laver and Ken Rosewall, and never looked back. But the real beauty of Connors' career, longevity. He was still ranked in the top 10 in his mid-30s. That's wild. The game around him kept evolving, but more power, bigger serves, faster pace, and he just adapted. He wasn't a huge guy physically, but he was relentless. His game aged like fine wine. He was still out there competing into his 40s against guys half his age swinging out of their shoes. That's how he racked up a mind-boggling 109 career titles, still the most of all time. Think about that for a second. He also had a near 82% win percentage and 8 Grand Slam titles to his name. So yeah, Jimmy wasn't just a great player, he was a transformational one. Ivan Lendl was one of the pioneers of the modern game as we know it today. He brought in that more Western grip and was also one of the first to really adopt the modern racket. He came along right as the sport was evolving, and honestly, he probably benefited more than anyone from that transition. Don't get me wrong, the guy was great, no doubt, but had he been born 10 years earlier when wood and steel rackets still ruled the game, or 10 years later when everyone else had time to adapt their game to the new tech, I don't think we'd be talking about him with quite the same
reverence, I don't think he's an 8-time Grand Slam champion in either of those alternate timelines. 8. John McEnroe. McEnroe and Lendl were from the same era, but their games couldn't have been more different. Where Lendl's style fit the modern era like a glove, McEnroe was almost a throwback, built for an earlier time. The switch to modern equipment, that hurt him. His classic serve and volley game and Eastern grip still worked, sure, but not nearly as dominantly. And look, it didn't help that he seemed to lose a bit of that competitive fire once his biggest rival, Bjorn Borg, stepped away from the game. Like a lot of Western players in the 70s and 80s, the Australian Open just wasn't a big deal to him either. But still, one of his best achievements, defending home turf and blocking Borg from that elusive U.S. Open title. He beat him in the final twice. Also, don't sleep on his doubles game. McEnroe might be the best doubles player among the all-time greats. 9 Grand Slam doubles titles to go with his 7 in singles. That's elite. 9th, Rod Laver. The forearm himself, Rod Laver, won 11 majors in total. Now, 6 of those came before the Open era, back when the pros weren't even allowed to compete in the Grand Slam events. But in that professional period, Laver racked up another 8 major titles. Events like the U.S. Pro, Wembley Pro, and French Pro. Even with all that, once the Open era began, he was already into his 30s, kind of past his prime, like fellow Aussie Ken Rosewall. So yeah, Laver had an all-time great career, no doubt, but it's a little harder to quantify just because he straddled such a weird transitional moment in tennis history. Also worth noting, he was a beast in doubles too. 8 Grand Slam doubles titles and 5 Open era singles titles. The resume speaks for itself. Agassi, one of the most talented, charismatic, and, let's be real, complicated players to ever pick up a racket. He's one of the few players in history to complete a Golden Slam, but honestly, he probably could have done even more. Early in his career, he wasn't all that focused. He was injured a lot, distracted by fame, and for a while, tennis felt like a side gig to the whole celebrity thing. Case in point, he's talked about how he was so worried about his hair weave falling off that it probably cost him the 1990 French Open. True story. He skipped Wimbledon for 3 years, partly because he didn't want to wear white. He didn't play the Australian Open for the first 8 years of his career. For a long time, he rarely even played all 4 slams in a season, and yet his first Grand Slam title ended up coming at Wimbledon, of all places. Ironic, right? There were a lot of missed opportunities in those early years. He had the talent. He just wasn't always locked in. Now, here's the flip side. If he had been laser-focused from day one, maybe he doesn't play into his mid-30s, maybe he burns out or his body breaks down even earlier. Who knows? Maybe this was always going to be the career he had. But it's not crazy to think that a more focused early career Agassi adds 2 or 3 more Grand Slam titles. And hey, if that had happened, he'd probably be a consensus top 10 player of all time. Right up there with the best to ever do it. 11. Andy Murray. We already talked about Murray earlier, but let's dig in a little more. He's easily one of the best tennis players of his era. Maybe of all time. And honestly, if he didn't have the misfortune of playing in the same era as the Big Three, he'd probably have a trophy case that looks a whole lot fuller. Murray made it to 11 Grand Slam finals. Lost 8 of them, and 8 of those were to Roger Federer or Novak Djokovic. That's just brutal. He's the one guy where I truly believe his Grand Slam count doesn't reflect how good he actually was. He's not the only player who got unlucky during that time, but he's the only one who could have been an all-time great himself if he'd played in a different era. And let's not forget, Murray has an Olympic gold medal too, which in tennis I think should count almost like a major. You don't get many chances at it, and it's a rare achievement. Becker won Wimbledon at just 17 years old. Let that sink in. 17, youngest Grand Slam singles winner ever at the time, until Michael Chang came along, and then he went back-to-back, winning Wimbledon again the next year. Dude didn't fluke into it. Becker ended his career with 6 Grand Slam singles titles. His last came in 1996 when he was 29. But really, his prime was those first 7 years after he burst onto the scene. Now keep in mind, in The mid-'80s were a transitional time in tennis gear. Players were moving to graphite rackets, and that change probably gave Becker an edge. As a younger player without those ingrained habits, he adapted quicker than the veterans, still figuring out how to swing a graphite stick on grass. Edberg also won 6 Grand Slam singles titles, 2 each at Wimbledon, the Australian Open, and the US Open. He came this close to pulling off a career Grand Slam. His shot at the French Open, that came in 1989. He lost in 5 sets to 17-year-old Michael Chang, the only slam Chang ever won. Edberg wasn't just a great singles player either. He was elite in doubles too. 3 Grand Slam doubles titles to his name. That kind of versatility is rare. Total baller on both fronts. 14, Ken Rosewall. Rosewall's legacy is tricky to quantify because of how much tennis changed right as he was peaking. Like Rod Laver, his career straddled the amateur and open eras, so his Grand Slam total doesn't tell the whole story. Officially, in the open era, he's credited with just 4 Grand Slam singles titles. But the guy was still reaching slam finals into his late 30s and early 40s. That's a ridiculous level of longevity. If you include the big-time pro events before the Open era, like the US Pro, Wembley Pro, and French Pro, Rosewall won 15 of those in the 1960s alone. Add it all up, and he had 8 total Grand Slam singles titles and 9 Grand Slam doubles titles. He was a victim of tennis history more than anything. The guy was phenomenal. Mats Wilander. Wilander won 7 Grand Slam singles titles, more than Becker or Edberg. So, yeah, there's definitely a case to rank him higher. But for me, overall, resume matters too. And I think Becker and Edberg were slightly more impactful across the board. That said, it's close. All 3 are in the same tier. Wilander and Edberg each lost 4 slam finals. Becker lost 3. But when you look at everything outside the slams, Edberg and Becker had more consistent success. Wilander struggled on grass, never made it past the quarterfinals at Wimbledon, and some of his Australian Open wins came during weaker years for the field. Still, his titles at the US Open in '88 and French Open in '82, '85, and '88, those are legit. He was definitely stronger on clay than on hard or grass courts. He's not quite top 10 all-time like Agassi, who also had 7 slams, and he's not on the level of Nadal or Djokovic, obviously, but the guy did spend 20 weeks as world number 1. That's nothing to sneeze at. Carlos Alcaraz, a heat seeker, enters the top 25. All right, folks, it's safe to say that if Carlos Alcaraz can stay healthy, he's absolutely going to make a massive push toward the top. I mean, after his epic and historic first Wimbledon victory over Novak Djokovic, he's already entered the top 25 of all time in my book, and since then he's added 2 more Grand Slam titles to bring his total to 4. That's right, 4. Now, let's be honest. No one expected Alcaraz to win Wimbledon this early, let alone beat Djokovic, right? I mean, Djokovic was in his prime, having just come off winning the first 2 majors of the year and the last 3 he'd played in, not to mention he had won the last 4 Wimbledon championships. So this wasn't just a case of beating an old man. Novak was still dominant. But here we are. Alcaraz is now ranked 21st, sitting comfortably between tennis legends like Arthur Ashe and Jim Courier, and he's only 21 years old. Yeah, you heard that right. 21. All right, that's a wrap for today. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you got some good insights. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with anyone who'd find it useful. And don't forget to check out theresourcenexus.com for more in-depth analysis. Until next time, check you later.
Cool. Guess we'll see you around.
All right, check you later.
Bye.
Wait, man, why are you always such a dork, man?
What are you talking
Check you
about?
later. Check you later.